some the Photoshop and Lightroom tonight is where we're going to be putting my energy. Primarily Lightroom, but I want to touch on Photoshop just a little bit and kind of give you a comparison between the two. I think there's a lot of misinformation about which one. People think you have to use Lightroom or Photoshop and learn Photoshop, and I'm going to tell you that you can do. I think for most new, especially a new photographer, but most photographers, unless you're doing compositing or layout work or a lot of replacement, which hopefully you're not having to do a lot of that kind of stuff, because it means you didn't pay attention when you're doing the shoot, that you can do 90% of what you need to do, at least 80% of what you need to do in Lightroom. I'm going to show you that tonight and show you a couple of tips and tricks and things that I've learned over the years that I've been using the product. Let's see, what else? Oh, I know. I also want to remind you that on the first Friday of the month that we do photo reviews. And so if you'd like to submit your work, we've already got some stuff already for the first Friday of the month. Be sure and submit your photos to go to review.photomentor.tv. Simple questionnaire, name, email, so I can ask any questions, how long you've been shooting, a couple things like that. Doesn't matter what you're using. I don't care if you're using an iPhone or a Hasselblad. More than welcome to submit your work. All the reviews are anonymous, so therefore nobody has to be embarrassed if you're a new photographer. And the idea here is to give you professional feedback on your work and really to help you improve artistically and technically. This is not about likes. It's not about whether I like the image or not. It's about whether the image works or not from a artistic standpoint. So again, if you're interested in that, we'd love to have you join us for that as well. Again, if you're in the social media world, we have a number of ways you can keep up on what we're doing. Be sure and follow us on Facebook, of course, Instagram, and like I said before, YouTube or Twitter. And we were happy to follow you back, of course. And last but not least is we also have a Facebook group. If you're interested in getting a little more detail about what we're doing here, and it's more of a hands-on, a little more intimate kind of a thing, small group, and I respond to every message there, and you can ask any question you want, and we'll kind of dive into a little more detail than what we do on the public page. So anyway, more than welcome to have you join there. So it's photomentor.tv/join. Fill out a simple questionnaire and join us over there. I think you guys would really enjoy it. Okay, enough of all that stuff. Let's get into the meat and potatoes of tonight's show. Again, as I said before, we're going to talk about Photoshop versus Lightroom and talk a little bit about what's going on there and how that works. And so the first thing, this is a workshop that I did and much more. It was a couple hours long, and we're not going to have that tonight. But so this is a very short version of this, kind of a high-level overview, and we're going to just touch on a few things. I'm going to show you the product as well, and we're going to give you some, again, as I mentioned, show you a couple of tips and some things like that. The purpose of this thing is tonight is to kind of go over again to correct some bad information that I think a lot of people get, help you with any questions that you might have the best I can, encourage you, of course, and get you on the right path. And maybe because I was dropped on my head as a child and I don't know any better, and I should be doing upstairs watching television instead of doing this, but I don't know any better. What can I say? So you're stuck with me. Before we get going, I want to repeat a quote that I'm fond of repeating. You guys have watched the show. You certainly have heard me say this before, and it applies, I think, definitely what we're doing here this evening, and that is that the negative is comparable to the composer's score, and the print its performance. Each performance differs in subtle ways, and this was a quote by Ansel Adams. And what he's trying to say here is that when you capture the image, it's only part of the photography equation. That the negative, or the digital negative, is really just the start, and that your vision comes to life in the post-processing or in the darkroom or in today's digital darkroom. And So, you know, I'm not a big believer in correcting a lot of mistakes in post processing. I think you want to try and get it as close as possible in camera, but it's where I really look at an image and it comes to life for me. I'll tell you that one of the things that I like to do, one of the techniques I like to use is I will, if possible, it's going to depend on the client and the project I'm working on, but if it's something I have time for, I prefer to ingest the images, bring them into Lightroom, and just make sure they're there and let them sit at least for a week, and then come back a week later and look at the images and then review them and grade them and rate them. And the reason is because I find I'm much more objective about it if I wait. If I look at them right away after the shoot, I'm too close to the shoot. I remember I was right there. I was just left the project and I came home and I imported them, and I'm not as objective, and I'll sometimes be more critical or less critical about things than I need to be. So I think I suggest you try this if you can. Put your images in the system, look at them, and then just make sure they're there, and then go leave them a while, and then come back to them. I'll even go back and look at stuff I've shot years later, and my technique has improved as far as post-processing, and images I didn't think were really that good, I now look at and go, you know what, if I crop this, there really is, the composition is not that bad. I shot a little looser than I thought. At the time, I didn't like it, but now I see where it really does work. And so a lot of times you're going to find that you're working with an image or you're working with a concept, you don't quite know what it is. You're kind of adjusting it. You're kind of going around. You're saying there's something here, but I don't quite know what it is. And so by letting it percolate a little bit and coming back to it, you're going to find you might be a little more objective about it. So anyway, again, ask questions. If you have questions about anything I'm talking about, leave them in the comments. Watching the Facebook and YouTube, of course, are the two that we're primarily watching. You can leave a question there, and they'll show up on my screen or Sue Ann's screen. Somebody will bring them to my attention, and we'll do our best to answer them. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is what's the difference between Photoshop and Lightroom. A lot of people kind of get them mixed up, or they're saying, oh, you have to use Photoshop, you need to learn Photoshop. And I'm going to tell you that you don't have to learn Photoshop. There's a lot of things you can do. In fact, I'm going to show you some similarities in the underlying architecture of Photoshop that is actually in Lightroom. And a lot of the controls that are in Lightroom came or the same engine that's running Photoshop. But the biggest difference is that Photoshop is really meant as a photo compositing and layout tool. It's meant to be used to add layers and masking and things like that, which I'm going to demonstrate in a minute here for you. But it's really meant to be a lot more intensive repair and layout of an image. So this example right here, I don't know if you can see or not, but it's a photo I shot of an international blues musician named Tab Benoit. And this was his dressing room backstage. He was getting ready to go on to perform in just about 5 minutes, and we're backstage. And as you can see, I had this, if you can look over in the right there, you can see his guitar is in there, and I had his road manager put the guitar in there. I don't want him to hold it. I wanted something a little different. But the roof and the ceiling, it was kind of a beat-up dressing room. So I really wanted that look, but I didn't like the way it was appearing. So what I did is I took it out and modified it by using layers and masking. And so therefore you now can see the guitar there. You can see that if you go back, you'll notice that 2 light bulbs are out on the makeup lights there, and then also the roof tiles were all kind of nasty looking. And so I fixed the roof tile and I repaired the light bulbs there in Photoshop. That's the kind of stuff that you can do in Photoshop that's very difficult or almost nearly impossible in Lightroom. So that's what I mean when I say compositing and masking. All the things there in the red circle are layers. Those are multiple layers of content or mask or effects or whatever. And that's something you don't have in Lightroom. Also, again, it's a destructive editor. This is so in other words, when you make a change, let's say you load your raw file or in JPEG and you edit it and then you save it, it's going to overwrite the original file unless you save a second copy, you know, a duplicate. And then when you do that, though, let's say it's a one, I've got some files that are 1 or 2 gigabytes in size, maybe even bigger. So it's going to take up more space every time you save that file. So it's destructive. In other words, if you save it as a raw file, it's going to save right over top of the original raw file or TIFF or Photoshop file or whatever. The photo here is an example of a before and after that I did. I was on assignment for a magazine doing this for Comic-Con, and the guy on the left is what the original picture looked like. I had some studio lights set up there, and then the one on the right is what I ended up doing with the compositing, creating the background. I don't know if you probably can't see in this picture, there's birds up there on the right-hand side, and I is based on what he was telling me. This character was telling me about this guy called a Nord. And so anyway, the point is that's something you can do in Photoshop that you can absolutely not do in Lightroom. So this is really where Photoshop, its strength is. But at the same time, it's also a very complex program. The learning curve is pretty steep. They keep changing things. And I'll be honest with you, I've been using this product since version 2.5 on the Mac, and then I went to version 3.0 on Windows. So I've been using it a long time, longer than I want to admit. You figure you have to look it up and figure out what version, when 2.5 was released. But the point is, you never really master it. It's just a program that's just complex. It's phenomenal. I mean, you can do amazing things with it, but it's not something that you would do to edit a wedding, for example. It's just too cumbersome to use on something like that. It's not meant for that. It's really meant to do posters and layout, and like I said, compositing. So it's a great tool, but it's not a great tool for everything. So you don't necessarily need to use it on most jobs, especially if you're getting started. Okay, now Lightroom, on the other hand, is a very different product. Lightroom, and I tell you what, let's go back for a second. I'm going to show you. Let's switch over here to Photoshop. If I can bring this up here. So, okay. So this is Photoshop here. And this is my kitty, a little Djibouti here. She's a cutie. She's just adorable. Anyway. And as you can, so it's I've hit all these down here on the left-hand side are all the settings. If you want to do text, if you want to do replace something, you can do that. You can do shapes, gradations, all kinds of things. You can cropping, of course, and masking. There's just a ton of different things you can do here. So this is again why it's getting so complex. Now, one of my problems, quite frankly, is when I teach this is that I'm so used to using the shortcuts that I forget how to use them where the menus are. Thank goodness they move them around, and so therefore I don't care. But anyway, so as you can see, it's a very different program. You can edit a raw file with it, and I want to show you something real quick. If I double click on this right here, it's going to open the raw editor, and I'm going to make a note of this. We're going to come back to this in a second. But on the right-hand side, if you look, you have the basics. You have white balance, temperature, exposure, contrast, highlight, shadows, blacks, texture, vibrance, all that kind of stuff. So please just make a visual note of this, because in a minute when I show you Lightroom, you're going to realize they're pretty much the same thing. So this is what they call the raw editor, or camera raw. And this is reading the file right off the system, and that's why it looks so flat, because as you can see up in the histogram, the exposure is a little underexposed there. It needs to come up a little bit, and some things like that. So there's had no adjustments, just straight out of camera, which is why I keep trying to explain to people you need to be charging for editing, because this stuff takes time. It doesn't happen automatic. It doesn't pop out of the camera looking great. All right, there's some changes. A raw file is purposely a negative, and therefore it's not touched. It doesn't have any settings adjusted to it, and so therefore it takes a lot of time. So you need to explain that to your client when you tell them why you're charging for your post-processing, and that's the reason, because it's not going to come out of the camera looking fantastic. You're going to have to do some work to make that happen. So anyway, all right. So anyway, so that's the difference in a little bit what Photoshop looks like. We're going to be kind of going back and forth here, so hang in there. All right. So we look at Lightroom now, and Lightroom is a very different animal. Lightroom is not. It's an editor, but it's also a what am I trying to say? It's a digital asset management system. So in other words, if I show you what this looks like, okay, these are all the images that are in the catalog. And when I talk about catalog, let me just kind of go back to this so I can explain what I'm talking about here. Catalog is a database. The catalog keeps track of everything you've done in Lightroom. It's not, Photoshop doesn't do that. Photoshop makes the changes, and then when you save the file, it writes over the file and it creates those changes, and that's it. You're done. But with Lightroom, you're not actually adjusting the file itself. You're only making changes to the database. So that's something I really like about Lightroom, is it's non-destructive. And I'm going to demonstrate that in a minute. You can make all kinds of changes you want to the file as many times as you want, make multiple copies of the instructions, but it never actually touches the original file. So you always have an original negative available. All that information is stored in the database, but not the images. And that's a misconception. The Lightroom catalog does not store images. All it stores is the location of the images. So that's why sometimes if you've used Lightroom and you get the little exclamation point where the file is missing, that's why, because you moved it outside of Lightroom, and Lightroom no longer knows where that file is located, and that's what causes that. But it stores the file location, all your edit changes, your metadata, meaning your lens, the date, time, all that kind of stuff. But the images are not stored in there. Okay. And here, let me just kind of show you real quick. So if I go over here to, I just look at metadata, it will, whoops, got to do this. Go metadata. It will show me all what's called the EXIF data, what day it was shot, what the resolution is, what lens I had on when I was shooting, what camera it was, and the serial number of the camera, a whole bunch of things. Okay. So this is all stored in the database here in Lightroom when I import those images. I can also keyword the images, and if I want, I can put information in here about, I can put cat, I can put the cat's name, I can put where it was located, and so I can do all kinds of keywording in here so I can find them later on. A lot of people don't do this, but if you're doing stock photography or things like that, then you certainly want to have that information. Anyway. So that's why they call it a library, because it's really it's storing all the information in here about this particular image. Okay. All right. So that's one of the big differences between Lightroom and Photoshop is Lightroom is a way to manage your data and your images. Photoshop is not. Now, I'm going to make a disclaimer here. There's a couple of ways you can do some things in Photoshop using what's called Bridge application. It's a separate little module, but it's not really intuitive. Well, it's intuitive, okay. But it's just not very easy to use, and it's not meant to be used to adjust multiple images. It's meant to be using to adjust one image. You're creating a poster or something like that. That's what it's really designed to do. It's not designed to work on a bunch of images at one time, which I'm going to show you here in a minute. Okay. So as I said before, it's non-destructive. So if I'll demonstrate this in a minute here. But if I have the raw file over here on the left called 4429, and it's a Nikon raw file, it's NEF is a negative file. What happens is when I make adjustments, let's say I want to convert it to black and white, it doesn't actually adjust the image. It doesn't take the color out of the image. It just takes those settings, those sliders that I'm moving around, and it stores that in the catalog. Yes, I called it a catalog. Um, but and then it creates a black and white file when you export only. But until then, all you're doing is moving sliders around. You haven't actually done anything to the file. You haven't created a file. You haven't created anything other than making adjustments. So when you, and I'll show you this in a second, when you export, that's when things become an actual file, and it takes and embeds that information in there. Okay, so the difference is between Lightroom and Photoshop. Photoshop is a very complex program. It's really meant for more along the lines of photo compositing and image manipulation. And Lightroom does image manipulation, but it also is really more of a network or a image management system. So you can now keep track of what's going on with your images and find them. I don't know if you noticed on my system, I have over 200,000 images in my catalog. So finding those images from all my clients is a pretty big deal, and having those managed, knowing where they are, and keeping track of them. So if you have any questions, go ahead and leave those in the comments now before we move on to the next section, and I'll be glad to try and address them as best I can. Okay. So the point I'm trying to make here is that you don't always need Photoshop. I described Photoshop as like, you know, people, oh, you gotta use Photoshop. You gotta use Photoshop just to make simple color corrections or cropping or things like that. Well, I describe that as trying to kill an ant with a hammer. It's way overkill. You do not need to learn Photoshop to do to do the basic things you're going to want to learn to use. And Lightroom can do an awful lot of that, because it's essentially the same basic engine underneath. Okay. All right, so that is that. So let's switch back over to Lightroom. I'm going to show you a couple of things here, a couple of tricks. So first of all, if you notice the settings on the left here, exposure, contrast, highlights, blacks, texture, vibrance, and saturation, those are exactly the same settings that we had over in Photoshop. Exposure, contrast, highlight, when you're working on the raw file. So this is essentially the same engine underneath under both programs. So when you're making these adjustments, you're doing the same thing, but they've made it a lot easier in Lightroom than it is under Photoshop, believe me. A couple old things, maybe you know this, maybe you don't. If you when you move these sliders around, they're kind of hard sometimes to get. You can also come over here and you can move it left or right. You can also go up and down, okay, to make adjustments if you want. And if you hold the, I believe, the shift key, it'll make larger adjustments at the same time. But the other nice thing is, if you make a mistake, which of course none of you guys ever do, right? Let's say you wait too much. Oh, that's too much. I got to get rid of it. I want to reset it. All you do is double click on the name of that setting and it will reset it. So if I double click on exposure, it'll bring it down to 0 instead of coming over here and trying to go and get it into 0 or put the 0 in here. If I just double click on the word exposure, it'll bring it down to and bring it right, reset it for me. So now I can come in here and try it again. You want to use this histogram up here. There's two little, also another tip, there's two little dots or triangles here. This one on the left is for the blacks, and this one over here is for whites. If you click on it, it will show you a setting or a warning when the image is either underexposed or too overexposed. So if I go in here and I come into, let's go to here, I'll turn it way down. So if I turn it way down, it should, there we go. If I move this over here, see how it turns the blue? That's showing me that there's no detail in the blacks. That's what it's trying to show me. So if I bring that up, now I know there's just a little bit of, you can see right there in her eye. Okay, there's still no detail there. That's okay. Some things don't have detail in them, but I can bring this up, or I can bring up the shadows to take care of that. Okay, so same thing with the whites. If I have on the other side, if I have it too overexposed, it will also turn red, which shows me that now the image is overexposed. There's no detail there. So again, if you're shooting sky, clouds, a lot of times then that's okay because that's just the way it is. There's no detail in some of those things. But it does give you a warning, a gamut warning, which is kind of nice to have. Okay? All right. So that's a couple of tips there. You have a whole bunch of stuff here. Again, all these changes I'm making are not affecting the image whatsoever. The image is still the original image. It's not changing at all. And I can actually compare some things like that. I can compare images if I want to make changes and a couple things like that. I can also come down here. These are, and I can make multiple copies of the image. If I wanted to work on this image, let's say I want to see what this image looks like in black and white. Well, I can obviously go up here and click on black and white, but maybe I want to keep a color version as well. So what you can do is you can come down here into your thumbnail and you right mouse click on it and you say, I want to create a virtual copy. Now, a virtual copy is not another copy of the file. So this file size, this is a pretty big file right here. This is, let's see if it tells me how big this file is. Well, it's 8,256 by 8,000 and is that 8,000? 6,504, and so it's a pretty big file. I don't know. It's probably a 40 megabyte file at least, maybe even bigger. But the point is that if I come in here and I make a virtual copy, it does not duplicate that file. It does not make a second raw copy. All it does is make a thumbnail. It takes about 16K, maybe less, of data to make that file, and then the adjustments I make on that, again, are stored in the database. So I'm not taking up twice the disk space. Where if I did this in Photoshop, and let's say this is a 50 megabyte file, and I make a copy of it and edit one in black and white, one in color, you're now going to have 100 megabytes worth of data stored up, 50 megabytes each. And if you make more changes, it gets even bigger than that because it's just the raw file. But as you make more changes, you do more layers, it actually takes even more space. It's not the way this works in Lightroom. Again, remember, everything's just stored in the database. We're not actually duplicating the file. But just for the sake of just, I'll show you how this works. I can create a virtual copy. So now there's two copies here. This one I can go and make in black and white. Okay, and this one is in color. So I now have two copies. Again, it's just settings that are doing it. It's not actually making a copy of the file, as I've said multiple times. And now I can come in here in my black and white settings, and I can make adjustments. I'll just hit auto just for the heck of it. So anything that this bag, if you remember correctly, is red. Okay. So if I come over here and I adjust the red, then that will make this the reds brighter or darker. So I got the gamut warning turned on there. Turn that on. Okay. So I can make adjustments, see what they look like here. And if I say, I don't really like that, it's no big deal because I can come over here and delete this image. Okay. And I'm just going to remove it from Lightroom. I'm not actually going to take the original out. The original is still there. He said, there we go. The original's still there. It was just a virtual copy. And again, it wasn't actually a file. It was just a bunch of settings that were stored in the database. Okay. All right. So any questions on that, you guys let me know. So the other thing you want to do is, so when you bring in an image into your system and you import it, one of the things that I've found is I call it learning the file. So when you get a camera, let's say you get a new camera, and you start importing files, you're going to find that over time you're going to end up doing about the same thing over and over again. So in other words, if you look at all these files, they're shot about the same time, let's say this one here, it looks like it's also about the same exposure, right? It's just a little underexposed. So I may want to bring it up, and I figure that's going to be, I think this one over here was about a stop and a half. Not a little, it's too much maybe. Okay, whatever. Let's just say about 1.3. Okay, so what I can do now is I can take and right click and copy these settings. if I wanted, and apply them to another image or multiple images, in fact. So I go to the develop settings, and I say I want to copy the settings, and it gives me an option to decide what I want to select. I want to copy everything, all the settings, or none of them. So maybe I just want to do check none, and I just want to do the exposure and the white balance. And so now it's just going to copy those two settings, and so I can now come over here and apply this to this photo here. Go to my go to my develop settings, paste, and now I've got the exact same settings, at least white balance and exposure. Looks like I missed the focus on that one. On the image. So now that's nice, right? It's really helpful, but guess what? I can also do the same thing to multiple images. So let's say now I have 3 images here I can apply this to if I wanted to, and so I could actually update a whole bunch of information, a whole bunch of images. So now all 3 images have the same white balance and exposure setting. So once again, that's why I'm saying if you're photographing a wedding or some event and you've got a couple hundred images or more, and you notice that, wow, my exposure wasn't quite right or my white balance is a little off, I can now make a correction to one image and I can apply that to hundreds of images at the same time. Can't do that in Photoshop. So that's why Lightroom is really much better for doing image management and control. That's what I keep talking about. So the point is, what I was going to tell you though before is that also, not only can I do that, but I can now let's say I'm going to be doing a lot of images, or let's say I end up finding I'm going to do this over and over again. I can also come over here and save that as a preset. Okay, I can create a preset called cat, and I can just say I want to select all or whatever I want to do and save that as a preset and apply that also to a bunch of images at the same, just by clicking one button. I know, it's a little frustrating for me because I see a lot of people that say, oh, what preset did you use? And they're not on my images, but they're like posting in groups. And yeah, sure, Tamara, I'd be glad to. So the let's see. Tamara wants to know if I can demonstrate the healing tool. You're really frustrated because it leaves a bunch of circles everywhere and gets confused. Yeah, it does. It's not perfect. It's a little bit tricky, and there's a couple of settings you can use that might help you. But I'll be glad to try and do that. Anyway, so the point is you can apply a setting to a lot of images at one time instead of just one image. So when you're working on a photo shoot, a session with a client, whether it be families or an event or whatever, it's really, really handy to be able to do that. But the other thing you can do is, I call it learning the file. I find that there's certain things I do to a file from the same camera over and over. In other words, let's say sharpening is a good one. I'm going to demonstrate that in a minute. A couple of tips on sharpening. With the higher the resolution camera, let's say it's a 24 megapixel camera versus a 12 megapixel versus a 40 or 2 megapixel. You're going to have, I find I have to apply more sharpening to the higher resolution image than the lower resolution image, which you wouldn't think would be the case, but it's true. And so therefore, when I bring that file in, I want to make sure I apply the same sharpening all the time, because I find I end up sliding that thing over all the way, let's say 75%, over and over and over again. I don't want to apply that to a bunch of images every time I bring them in and then manually do that. Well, what you can do is you can save that as a preset. Okay, so let's say I've got my settings here, got this over here. Let's say I've got my clarity, take some noise out for whatever. That looks awful. Or dehaze. Let's say I like to punch up the color a little bit. Maybe I'm oversaturating it. Whatever it may be. Say I want to warm it up a little bit. too much, of course. I should have, let's reset it. Okay. So let's say that's the setting that I want to use, and I find I use that over and over again. Okay, what I can do now is when I come over here to preset and I create a preset, okay, I could call this my D850. Whoops, helps if you can not use uppercase on everything. There we go, D850. And I can now save that. So what I would do is I would check all of them except two of them. I would not check white balance, and I do not check exposure. And the reason I don't do that is because every image may change from shot to shot. I'm moving around, I change the camera angle, the location, whatever. Those two things will change, and I don't want to set that every time. Let me back up. I don't want the preset to set that. I want to make those two adjustments manually every time because I may want to tweak them. But the sharpening, the saturation, the contrast, all those things, I find I do them over and over and over again. So I'm going to save those, and when I import the images, I'm going to apply those settings, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. So I don't have to do that every time. So when I import that, I say I want to use my D850 settings. It's going to apply those to every image that comes in. Saves me tons of time. Okay. So let's see if I can go back to Tamara's question here. So she wants to see the healing tool. All right, we'll try and see how this works here. So the brush tool is very, very handy. I use the brush tool a lot and the healing tool. So let's say, for example, and the healing tool is not easy to use. Let's see, I think this is, oh, wrong one. Yeah, that's right. Here we go. Okay, so there's a healing tool and a clone tool. It depends on which one you're trying to do. The healing tool will try and take some things away. Now, let's say, see there's a spot right here. I don't know if you guys can see this little spot right here. Probably can't see it on your screen. Maybe it's on my monitor, huh? So I'm trying to find something I can take out. So if say I wanted to remove some of these whiskers, so what I would do, and this is a little bit easier probably than what you're trying to do. Now see, that's a little easier, but what you want to do is if you feather it, make it softer, and also bring the opacity down. See what happens here? It's going to take this and it's going to use this source right here. Okay. And then if I close it, let's see how that works. So let's do it again. So let's say I want to take, it's something a little more complex. So I want to take, this is going to be kind of hard here. So I want to take this over here. Okay. See, it's probably going to mess that up. Yep. Let's undo that. Spot removal. Oh, I'm on the. So it's not really meant to be do big things. I'm trying to think if there's something examples specifically. Poor girl. So you can see where this second option is where I'm pulling this from. Okay. So that you click where you want it, and then you pick where you want the source to pull from. And then you can change the opacity. Not a very good example, but you can see what's happening here. Oops, jumps around a little bit, doesn't it? On something like this is probably, I wouldn't probably use the healing tool on this. I'd probably use the clone tool for this particular scenario. Let's delete this, see how this works. Poor girl. And also, I would also probably look at using the brush. I use the brush more than I use the clone tool. I admit when I start getting into this kind of stuff where I'm really removing things and changing things, a lot of times that is really where the one thing that Photoshop is easier to do. Let's see. I don't know if this is achieving what she wants or not here. Let's move this over. So I'm going to change my opacity down. Change the feathering down so you guys can see a little more of what's going on. There we go. Poor girl ain't got no nose. Okay. So I don't know if that's an example of what you're trying. So in my opinion, it's better to use blemish edit. So is it better to use blemish? Oh, to do blemish edits? Well, you can, blemishes you can do a lot easier. One way you can do, if you're talking about pores and things like that, I'm not sure I'd always use the healing tool. That may be the problem, is it's the wrong tool for that. So what you could do, click on this dot, delete. And reset this. Bring my girl back. Okay. So what you could do there on, for a blemish, you might be able to use either the, so what you can do is like you bring your brush tool. So let's say I want to take out a blemish. What you can also do is you can come down here, the clarity, you can come down and soften the clarity up and then take and then paint. Because the brush gives you so much more adjustment, more detail you can do here. So you might be able to try, if you're trying to soften skin, something like that, kind of make the blemishes a little better. You can do that. You can also come down to the sharpening tool and go down to sharpness and bring that down a little bit. Try that. Okay, and the clarity, and that will soften it up quite a bit. If that's what you're trying to get rid of. Okay, I'd start with that first before I start doing the blemishes thing, but then you can try doing both. So if you do that, and then just the blemish tool, the healing tool, that may do what you need to do. So I usually find that the healing tool only when I'm doing like little spots. I don't like to do large areas because, like you say, or you have to do a lot of them. So I know it's not an easy thing to demonstrate. So I don't know if that helps or not. Probably not. And if you, Tamara, if you send me an image of something you're having a problem with, it's maybe a little easier for me to just go ahead and send that to me, message it to me, or email it to me, and I'll look at it and then tell you how I would do it. Because it's really the right tool for the right job is the key. Okay. So again, though, you can see that while the retouching is kind of tough, you can go through and do an awful lot of work here. So I will definitely do a first pass on that. Now, one of the things that a lot of people have trouble with is sharpening, I noticed. So, oh, my images aren't sharp. How do I get them sharp? I want to show you guys a little trick here that'll help you. So you go down to detail, okay? And I know a lot of people don't seem to know this, but what makes an image sharp is technically what you're doing is you're adjusting the contrast of the image. So the first thing I would want to do and also the contrast makes the colors pop a little bit. So on all my images, I tend to take and punch up at least the contrast. I'll go overboard a little bit. Okay, so that's way too much. You can see but you can see the color, how much the color comes out when you do that, and also how much sharper it looks. So I always like to pump up the contrast a little bit, and it's going to depend again on the image and the camera you're using. Okay, and also did I take? Make sure I reset the clarity. Yeah. So clarity is also going to help a little bit, okay? But mainly it's the contrast. But the sharpening part, when I come down to sharpening, and this is where I find I have to do a lot of sharpening, depending on the resolution. See right here it says masking. What masking does is it will, and I think most of the time, by default, it's way over here. What masking does, it says anything that's going to be black, I'm going to block the mask. I'm going to block the sharpening. Anything that's white, I'm going to let that show through. So what you do is you hold, on the Mac, you hold the Option key, and on the PC, I believe it's the Alt key. You hold that button, and then you drag the mouse. You click on this button, and I'm holding the Alt key down, and I'm moving this mouse to the right. See the difference there? So what's happening is that's showing me that everything with the white edge is going to be sharpened and everything with the black edge is going to ignore, which is the way I typically do my sharpening. I don't want everything to be sharp. I only want the person. I don't care about this background. I don't care if this is sharp. I don't care if the bag's sharp. I want these eyes to be sharp. That's really the key. And so, and I understand when you say you don't, that makes perfect. You don't want to try to have to do too much editing. You want some. I mean, look, if you spend a little bit of time, 2 seconds, 5 seconds, a minute moving around a little bit, you'll find that you'll get a lot less. You have to do a lot less editing. Editing is fine for tweaking and getting it fine, but if you're doing a lot of extra editing, it's costing you money, it's costing you time. So it depends on the project. But if I'm doing a client work, every time I'm doing editing, that's costing me money almost. I mean, I'm charging the client, but still, it raises the price of my project. It means I'm sitting there in front of the computer. I love computers, but I didn't become a photographer to sit in front of the computer. Okay, so, and I think most people feel that way. So if you want to be a retoucher, become a retoucher. If you want to be a photographer, be a photographer. So, anyway, I get it. So no sense in doing that. So the other thing is, so by sharpening though, what you want to do is if you come over here and you hold the Alt key down on the PC and the Option key on the Mac, and I'm pushing that button down right now, and I'm now clicking on the masking. So what's going to happen is everything that's white is going to the sharpening is going to affect, and everything that's black it's going to ignore. It's going to block it. So now when I come over here and I adjust the sharpening, I'll again overdo it, of course, just so you guys can see it. And now if I adjust it, so that's sharpening everything, okay, the entire picture. And that's just sharpening the edges. And it's the edges that make the image sharp. The next thing I would do on a picture like this is, again, I'd go to brush and I'd come to the sharpening. I'd go to sharpening. Again, I'll overdo it just so you guys can see it. And I would take and I would paint. Make sure my flow is turned up. Yep. And I would paint right here in the eyes. Maybe a little bit on the nose, but that's it. I don't care about anything else. Those are the things I want to be sharp. Okay, and that's where I'm going to paint, and I'm going to make it look. Let's see, is this working? Yeah, there we go. Turn on the mask, and it shows you where where your effect is going to happen. Maybe I do her. Maybe do her whiskers a little bit. Okay. But that's really where the sharpening is going to affect. Nowhere else. Just the opposite if you wanted to soften them. Okay. Probably hard to tell on the video, but because it's not the resolution I'm looking at. So anyway, that's the thing I do with most images that I work on is I'll sharpen the eyes, and maybe the other thing is here's the key. Here's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to figure out what's the most important thing in the image, in the frame, and I want to draw the viewer's attention to that. You're telling a story here, and so you want to make sure whatever you do, you're drawing attention to that person or to that face, that's really what's important. So then on this, what you're doing, so I don't care about the background. I may want to darken the background. In fact, I could come over here. I could create a new brush. Okay, and over here, I could maybe turn the exposure down a little bit. Can't do it too much because then what will happen is it will get all gray and nasty looking. And again, this is another nice thing. It's kind of like using a smart object in Photoshop because I don't care if it's too much. And I'll show you why in a second. Okay. Let's see. You don't want to leave a halo around them. That's another telltale sign that it's been retouched. But now I can come over here and I can adjust. I can reset it, or I can now have some adjustment on it. All right, and I could also do the same thing. I can do the same thing with sharpening. I could unsharpen it, and I could also turn the. Oh, I see now why the clarity was turned down. Okay, and then you can toggle it on and off if you want to see what the effect is. Somewhere here. Okay, there's off. That's on. off, on, off. Okay. All right. One last thing here. I don't want to spend too much time on. The other thing I know a lot of people ask this question: how do I do watermarks? So I'm going to show you that real quick. So let's say I've got my picture and I'm done. It's all fine and dandy. I got it all nice and perfect, and I'm closed up here. Now I want to take this and I want to turn it into an image, because right now it's not an image, just a bunch of settings. So what I want to do now is I want to go and I want to export this. So I right mouse click and I say I want to export. Whoops. Okay. Now what I do on my system is I always put in here, I want to save, I want it to ask me, I want it to choose later. I don't want it to save any particular place, because I'm going to pick that. And the other thing I'll do is a lot of times I will pick a custom name or something. So this is going to be the cat. Okay. But I will, but all that, you know, I could, if I export 10 images, they're all going to say the cat. So I want to keep the original file number there. So now it's the cat plus the original file number. So I could always go back and find that if I wanted it. So JPEG, you're going to find not much difference between 80 and 100%. You can crank it up to 100 if you want, make a little bit of, if you're doing printing or a lab, you want to make sure, find out if they want sRGB or RGB. RGB is going to give you more colors and a better way to go, but it may not, they may not support that. But so you know, sRGB is going to be less color, not as vibrant, but it's just the way it is. So what you want to do here is you come down to watermarking and you check watermarking. Now this is not available, I noticed, in the CC version, only in the classic version. So this is, so you take a simple watermark, and then if you wanted, you could edit a watermark here. You could create just something in text. All right, so I could have my name here, lower left, copyright. I could put it in the upper, and I can have it in the right, left, wherever I want to put it. I can change it. I can add shadows to it. You want it proportional, so therefore it will change based on the resolution of the image. And then over here you can say I want it in the right, upper left, left, middle, wherever you want to put it. Okay. If you want to use a graphic, then you can also do that as well by, I don't remember where to do this here now. Oh yeah, you don't do, you up here, graphics. See, now I could go in here and I could load some kind of a graphic if I wanted. I don't have my logo handy. I could load a graphic and use a watermark graphic if I wanted on top of it. So now what I suggest you do is you want to save this. So I would save this as a preset, and I would call this Leela Photography, okay, and I would call it lower right, not for Lightroom, but for lower right. If it's upper left, it might be UL or upper right, and then that way, you know, or you can put text if you want, whatever you want in there. And now we'll save that as a preset. So if I save that and I'm done there, okay. So now when I want, next time I do an image or an export, all I got to do is come over here and pick which logo I want to use. If it's a graphic, that'll show up here. If it's just text, I just select that. And as soon as I export it, it's going to ask me where I want to put it. Okay, it's going to give me my hard drive settings here, and then I would export that, and now I'd have a JPEG or a PNG or whatever file format I wanted. And I can also set what size it's going to be. So anyway, that's a really quick overview. I know it's there's a lot more to it. That's really what I'm doing over in Photo Mentor Academy. I'm going to a lot more detail on the whole post-processing stuff. We're going to go into Photoshop, Lightroom, another product called Luminar, and also Affinity Photo, go into details on all those products because I think that's really important. And I think a lot of people, like I said, in the surveys I've done and talked to people, it's probably 3 or 4 on the list behind exposure, sharpening, posing, and editing is right in there. And like I said, 3 or 4. So hopefully that helps. Again, let me just remind you, if you guys, again, for the first Friday of the month, we do the photo reviews. Be sure and send your images in. Love to have them. I always enjoy seeing your work. If you're interested in having and joining us on social media, that'd be great. We're also happy to have you there as well. And again, if you're not in our Facebook group and that's something you want to do, be sure and join us over there also. And finally, but not last or least, here again, I want to remind you guys, your photography is all about telling a story. You want to make sure that your images have some kind of a story with them. It's not just enough to have a pretty picture. You really want to make sure that there's something that your images are telling, that when people tell something about the person, and about the scene. The background is incredibly important. So many people don't use the background and to tell that story, and it can be a huge value. I think I told somebody the other day is that the first thing I do when I go in to do a photo shoot, say a magazine, the first thing I'm looking for is a background. How do I find a background that's going to help tell the story? Or if it doesn't, I want to eliminate it. And then the next thing is lighting. Lighting's not first. It's actually the background. And last but not least is, remember, it's all about learning to see. Most important part of our job is learning to see, tell a story, and to look, to show people something that they're not used to seeing before. So it's not about technology. It's not about your camera. It's not about the lenses. It's about learning to see and learning to tell a story. And those are the things that are going to make a difference in your photography. So anyway, I hope this was helpful to you guys. And if you want to, again, thank you very, very much for making this year a really successful one. And I hope it's been helpful for you guys. And I appreciate it if you'd follow us, like the page, and also follow us and subscribe to the YouTube channel. So again, thanks very much, and have a great weekend.